I have two questions. First, I want to ask about the day of the oil spill itself on June 14. In the first press release that day, it gave no information on the possible spread of oil, which could be why the oil washing ashore on Saturday came as a surprise to some members of the public. So why was there no information about this at first? And my second question is on the deployment of containment booms. I understand the time in which the booms were laid out is within industry standards, but is there room for improvement, or is MOT looking to improve the response time for such spills, given that a quick response is crucial when such an oil spill happens?
Thank you, Justin, for your two questions. I think the first question, on the day itself, MPA did issue a media release to explain that there was this lesion, and after that, there was oil spill. Now, because I hope you understand it's an incident that happened, they knew that there was oil spilled, but at that point in time, the immediate response is to try and make sure that we are able to deal with it effectively. So first is to make sure that there's no more spillage from the damaged vessel. Because if you have oil that continues to come out in large amounts from the vessel, I think that will make the situation even worse. So they had to make sure, first of all, that the vessel is safe. It will not be at risk of sinking. The crew are okay. The damaged tank would not have continued spillage of oil. Then, as I explained earlier, you need to very quickly spray dispersant, because that is something that you have to do in the initial period. If you wait too long, the oil will start to harden. And then later on, it will become even more difficult to remove at sea and on land. Okay, so after doing the initial operations, they activated the company, T&T Salvage, to come and lay the containment booms. And I've also explained why that process takes time. At the situation on the first day, the oil, it's floating away, some of it, from the incident site. You don't quite know at that point in time where it will float to. So therefore, which of the shores and the beaches will be affected at that point in time. So MPA alerted our agencies, and then they deployed staff to be on the lookout. MPA also deployed vessels and drones to monitor, to track where the oil is going, and then to be able to then deal with it both at sea and on land. And as I shared in my remarks earlier, SDC, that evening itself, on the 14th of June, spotted some oil sheens, and then they started to take some measures to deal with the situation. Your second question about the booms, I think it depends a lot on the weather conditions, on also, I think, whether it's daytime or nighttime. So if in the situation where it is a daytime operation and the weather is fine, definitely I think the operator will be able to deploy more quickly compared to the situation that we had that day when it was nighttime and the weather conditions were not very good. Now, having said that, I think the important point to recognize is this. The containment booms are not intended as a way to fence in the oil that has been spilled. That is not possible. And this is not just in Singapore, this is also the case internationally, because by the time the containment boom vessel has arrived and deployed the booms, minimally it will take several hours, even if you are very, very fast. And you're able to deploy very, very quickly. It's an operation that takes time because of the scale that's involved. So that being the case, the oil would have floated away. So the response to oil spills is not to fence in the oil that has been spilled, but to take that as a preventive measure in case there's further spillage from a damaged vessel, and to then track where the oil is going and to then be able to deal with it downstream at other locations, both at sea and on land. I hope that answers your questions, Justin. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. First, to clarify about the timeline for the reopening of the waters. Timeline for reopening of waters. Okay, the specialized cleanup operations are expected to take around 3 months. Does it mean that the waters on East Coast Parks and Sentosa can only be opened after 3 months, or do you have a clearer timeline so that the public can know, have a better idea? And also, 3 ministers have mentioned the situation is very dynamic. So with the next 2 weeks of rainy weathers, how would the rain be affecting the cleaning works? Secondly, Mrs. Grace Fu mentioned about help support for businesses. What kind of support or help that you may be looking at to rental to businesses? Does it mean like rental rebate or that kind? Or how many businesses are affected by this? And lastly, one question is on Malaysia's claim on the impact of oil spill. Has Malaysia side actually approached Singapore on some assistance or compensations?
Thank you very much for the questions. I will take the first 3 questions. With regard to reopening of the beaches, I think there are 2 main considerations. First of all, whether cleaning operations have been completed. Second, even after cleaning operations have been completed, we have to ensure that the seawater quality remains safe and stable. So we probably need to take samples. If the samples show that the water quality is safe, we need to see that result over a period of 1 week to show a stability. So that's really roughly to give you the timeline. So we talked about 3 months. We are hoping that this will be the 3 months as needed, cleaning plus testing. But why is it an approximation? It's because, as I mentioned in my speech earlier on, there are many variables in the cleaning operations. We need to flush out the oil that's been trapped in the boulders, underneath the boulders, and we need to discover what's underneath the sand, see whether there are further sort of contaminated sand deep down below. There are many unknowns, and therefore we just want to be a bit more careful with our reply. So we think that 3 months is a good gauge, but we are, getting ourselves ready for surprises because things are, just not so certain. The weather has an impact. So, for example, if you have very high storm surges, it brings the spilled oil, any oil remnants in the sea back into the shore. If we have rain and then it happens with the tidal condition that brings the water out, then maybe it help to flush away. So actually there are many, many possibilities, including how the wind is blowing and how it's bringing the oil patches and dispersing the oil patches. Help for businesses, I think there are mainly 2 types of businesses that are being affected. One are those that are directly affected because they run operations on the beach waters. So we're talking about, businesses that are operating, for example, like kayak rentals, or, for example, we have businesses in Sentosa that is doing that dash with inflatables on the sea. Obviously, I think they will not be able to operate those activities until the cleaning operation is done. But there are also businesses that are affected because of perception about the smell and also about the oil spill. So we see in the initial period when there were some cancellations of people that has booked their venues along the beachfront. So, for example, we have eateries along the beachfronts that has been affected in the initial days when you can smell the sort of fumes coming in. But the operations are ongoing, and we see that as cleaning progresses, actually confidence has returned. And in fact, I was there on Saturday. Actually, I find that Singaporeans are back, and they are barbecuing along the beachfront. So we have to look at the situations accordingly. As I mentioned, there could be, some unexpected events. If we have further remnants of oil washing on shore, maybe it can affect the businesses in a longer period of time. So we want to watch the situation closely. But what I can assure the businesses is that the land agencies, the land agencies, whether it's NParks or Sentosa, will keep in close contact with the businesses. and they can be assured that we are, taking care of their concerns closely. Yeah, on the Malaysian. Yeah.
I'll take Jingyi's question on the impact on Malaysia. So as I mentioned earlier, we have been in close contact with our counterparts in Malaysia and Indonesia because the Straits of Malacca and Singapore, this whole area, is a very busy shipping channel. And close cooperation and coordination is required not just within our own ecosystem between the government agencies, our industry players, but also, I think, with our neighbors. So we have been in close contact with them. And I think your point about the claims, we have also informed our counterparts in Malaysia that they could submit claims for the cleaning costs and also affected stakeholders to British Marine, which is the insurer for the damaged bunker vessel. In accordance with international law, as I explained earlier, there's strict liability on the part of the insurer to ensure that the response and the claims can be processed quickly while the investigations are ongoing.
I have a couple of questions for Ms. Wu and Mr. Lee. So for Mr. Lee, I mean, you mentioned, you highlighted NParks' efforts in the biodiversity surveys. I was wondering if you could give an update on whether you know of any other wildlife casualties other than the 4 collared kingfishers that have been rescued by ACRES and NParks so far. That's one. And secondly, Mr. Chi did mention that marine honour will be liable to a variety of liabilities, including environmental damage. So does Singapore have a framework in place to assess how to calculate, the financial impact of environmental damage? And thirdly, I mean, Singapore has a Prevention of the Pollution of the Sea Act, but we also have the Wildlife Act. Is marine honour going to be, is there likely that marine honour will be charged under these acts for environmental pollution?
There were reports on the 4 collared kingfishers, 2 by NParks AVS and 2 by ACRES. And ST has reported that 2 have succumbed. The other 2 are still being treated. As for other wildlife, as I've said, both NParks as well as our community and nature partners and our volunteers are on the lookout for oil slick wildlife and will respond when we encounter them. So this is something that we're still watching out for in terms of the impact to both habitats as well as to wildlife, marine, avian fauna, and so on. Assessing impact of the damage to the environment, I think Minister Cheong Tat had addressed that earlier. There is a strict liability framework, different parties will put in the claims, and then it will be assessed based on the claims put forward. As for whether the Wildlife Act will be involved, I think let the investigations run its course, and then the relevant agencies will determine whether the matter needs to be pursued further under relevant legislation.
So regarding a statement made by a captain interviewed by SC, how feasible and practical is it for containment booms to be placed around ships at anchorages? And just to clarify, the tar balls that were shown earlier, are they currently present in beaches, and what threats do they pose to the environment or to people?
Thank you for your question. I will take your first part of the question, and then Minister Grace Wu will address the question about the tar balls. I saw the remark from the industry veteran, and I must say I'm not sure why he made that suggestion to place containment booms around vessels that are in our anchorages. Based on our checks with industry players, they don't think this is a practical or feasible move. And it is also not a practice in other major ports around the world. Let me explain why this is something that would not be feasible in practice. In our port, and I'm sure that's the case in many other major ports, we have many vessels at any one time. In our case, it's 1,000 vessels in our anchorage. And these vessels move in and out. So they come into Singapore, some to take supplies, some to offload cargo, take cargo, and then they will leave. So it's a very dynamic situation with large numbers of vessels. I explained earlier that it takes time to deploy the containment booms. So you can imagine if you had to do this for every ship in our anchorage, and there are 1,000 of them at any one time, this whole process will take a long time and will cost a lot of money. And industry players don't think that doing so preemptively is actually practical or feasible. we also have a risk that these booms are not deploy and forget, because you also have to keep them when the ship has left. And the booms themselves, when they are out there, could also snap and float away, and it could cause navigational safety concerns as well if they are not properly handled. And for all those reasons, I think that's why in many of the major ports around the world, this move is not done as a preemptive measure. You do it when there is a problem, there's an oil spill, you move in to try and, as a preventive measure, to prevent the oil from the damaged vessel. If it spills further, at least there's some protection. And to be able to trap whatever oil that has not floated away, I think that is useful. But to do so as a preemptive move, even when the ship is okay and there are so many ships, I think would not be practical or feasible.
As to tar ball, I don't know whether we can show the slide again on tar ball. On hindsight, we should have put a reference measurement. But actually, they're very, very small in size. I think the largest patch would probably be like nail size. But I'm told by the experts that over time, the next few days or weeks, with sun and heat shining on it, subjected to heat and the sun, they will actually coagulate further. And when it mixes with sand, it hardens. So we think that by that time, we can actually use a sieve to sieve them out. We have to make sure that it is safe for us to handle. If it's safe for the workers, I think we want to make it safe for the volunteers as well. And I will personally go down and try this out as well. It's something that we hope that, we can, use sort of a more generic method to manage this, to handle the long stretch of beach that has this tar balls. If we can handle it with volunteers' help, then it can actually free our cleaners to do the very specialized work, the cleaning of the rock buns and so on. So this is something that we are still working with our experts. So watch this space. When it's safe to do so, we will then, get the volunteers to join us. And of course, the volunteers will join us with proper gears and protection.
I have two questions. My first question is, in terms of preventive controls, I understand that the preemptive placement of booms, as you explained, is not feasible. But in light of this incident, are there any other learning points or updates to, preventive measures or mitigation measures at our ports to deal with this kind of oil spill again? And how will we balance that against the competitiveness of our port? My second question is on the future of fuel, because ships are moving towards using ammonia and methanol, which could be pretty toxic to marine life. So how will this incident guide how Singapore prepares, to deal with these kinds of marine fuel spills?
So I wanted to check on the claims part. So, given the costs incurred in the cleanup and third-party claims and now possible claims from Malaysia as well, what happens if the vessel or insurer tries to limit their liability or cap it at a certain amount? And will small businesses be able to, seek assistance to make claims, going forward?
I think I'll take both questions. The first set of questions on preventive measures, and also if you are looking at new types of marine fuels, ammonia, for example, the new types of fuel will help to have the shipping industry to decarbonize because they don't have carbon emissions. But it comes with a different set of safety challenges. If this is not a conventional oil spill but an ammonia leak, it is a very different situation. Instead of the fuel going into the water and then you have an oil spill, ammonia will likely be a plume cloud that will be out in the environment. So we have to deal with this kind of scenarios in a different way. And this is the reason why we have been very careful not to go into these new types of fuel before we are ready. We are conducting trials with industry players. We are also working with our tripartite partners, our industry players, our unions, to train our workers to be well-trained and ready to deal with these new types of fuels. And we will have to move ahead progressively, but safety must remain a top priority. Whether there are other measures that we can put in place, I think as Minister Desmond Lee mentioned earlier, after every incident, we will take a look at what are the learning points and how we can refine the processes going forward. And this is what we have done for previous incidents to help us to be able to respond better. And overall, I think this time around, our response has been good. But whether there are some areas, some learning points that we can incorporate for future incidents, I think this is something that we will certainly do so after we finish the cleaning up and the resumption to normalcy. The question from Natasha on the claims. You are right that there is a limit that Marine Honours insurer, British Marine, they have a limit. And under the law, this limit is set at about 8 million Singapore dollars. Now, however, in the event that the claims exceed this limit, they can also, and this is under international convention, submit claims against the International Oil Pollution Compensation Fund that has been set up. And this international fund has a much higher limit. It has a limit of 362 million. So the amount has been set based on what they assess will be necessary to deal with oil spill incidents. And you can imagine in the past, there have been many of these, even at a much more massive scale than what we are experiencing in other parts of the world. And the funds have been set aside, were tapped to be able to provide the compensation and the funding necessary for the cleaning up and the recovery process. So these are the international conventions that we have in place for the industry. And in addition to what the limit for the insurer, there is this additional International Oil Pollution Compensation Fund.